Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Wood, aye. Clough, aye.
Granger, aye.
Bellis and I. And item number 2, discussion and review of requirements to participate in a building permit fee waiver deferral program to support affordable housing opportunities in Washington City.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. This is just more of a summary that's a little bit more dialed in from our last conversation that we had a month or so ago in regards to a request to consider developing a program for fee waivers or even deferrals of qualified, attainable, for what I've been told, housing programs in Washington City. We've kind of, again, this was part of your packet. Hopefully you've had a chance to review that. More than anything else is we just want to make sure that we're going down the right direction. These that you will notice are suggestions like bullet point 2, which the number is 6, but that number is fluid. That can be adjusted or changed according to your direction.
You gave a number for that.
It's about 92,000.
Thank you.
92,242 or so.
For 6.
Yeah, for 6. So if we were to designate like a $95,000 number or up to 95,000 or up to 100,000, that's where about 6 permits would fall.
We actually haven't done any of this at all, and so
Yeah.
I kind of would like to start with 3 for the first year, and then if we get a lot more requests, reconsider it.
Perfect.
Rather than open it maybe too far.
I think the only one we've had so far, at least been out since the
It's
year I've been
one.
here, is 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a Habitat for Humanity.
yeah.
So I guess, yeah, we would, so I guess I'm curious how that came into us. I mean, they just came in and approached us for what they wanted though, correct? They weren't really, because we're not going to really advertise this.
Yeah, no, from what I understand or understood on that request is Habitat usually goes into areas where there are property available that they can either get donated to them or get it at a massive discount. And then they kind of go backwards. Then they try and look for discounts or consideration of discounts or fee waivers or reimbursements from the municipality that these land parcels are available at. So that's, I believe, what they did with us. And they pulled the permit back in July of 2019.
Matt, I got a question.
Yep.
Do you recall several years ago, one of the employees of Jones Paint and Glass, pardon me, had an accident on SR9. The dad was really messed up. They lost a couple of kids, and the community came together and ended up building a new house that was ADA compliant for that family because of the circumstances.
Situation.
Would this fall under, or would something like that fall into this?
I think it
Because
could.
because it lists out nonprofit entities. That,
Mhm.
I think, was a community build
Mhm.
to help a family.
I think it could, and again, if you notice, it is based on your approval. So if someone comes in and let's say applies through either, the community development department or approaches me on it, we would then in turn talk to the city manager. We will vet it out, and then if the city manager deems it's okay to move forward, then he, along with staff, will present that to city council, and then you determine how you'd want to handle the request that's being had.
That language doesn't really open to that, and maybe should be. It says qualified programs offered by established nonprofit entities. That doesn't open that up to some neighborhood people trying to help somebody get in a home. So we may want some language that might allow that, because I don't think.
Yeah,
that
again,
does.
this original brush was just structure. In the past, it's
Yeah,
been all
no, it's good.
nonprofit, other than
Yeah, it's very helpful. Yeah.
special requests or special situations that give us some flexibility to do that.
And
That would be fine.
Maybe we just say that special request
Circumstance.
can be brought to the
Mhm.
city.
Yeah, I think that's a good add. I think that's a great add if that is what you feel.
So
appropriate.
basically with the 92,242 for the 6, we're basically saying each residence is about 15,373,
Yep.
give or take.
Yep.
For impact fees, whole package.
Correct. And then again, for the Habitat for Humanity, I think their fee was 15,207
Okay,
is what their impact fee ended up.
beautiful. Thank you.
this earning less than 80%, is that what's in our housing plan, Matt?
It is in our affordable housing plan. And that's kind of a standard, how do I say, measurement
Is that,
on just qualifying throughout, whether it's a HUD program or other nonprofit programs. Usually about 80% of the area median income is kind of the sweet spot.
Is there a need for putting something on here that the property can't be way out in the sticks someplace? I mean, most of our incorporated areas aren't going to qualify for that, but where you're giving an allowance that directly goes towards, money that we would use for roads and water and other issues like that. If somebody were to build something way out on the periphery where, because the land was cheap, and then that could be a significant expense for the city over a number of years that might not be recouped.
would it be in the city, or would they be kicking out into the county?
Well, that's what I'm saying. We maybe we're fine if it's just within the city, and it wouldn't apply if it wasn't. But I just am wondering if there are areas in the city that we would be worried about that there could be an expense that would be just kind of sitting on the books for 5 or 8 years before.
Again, I think that's a good point. I think we can place boundaries, north, south, east, west, within this area,
Or
Could be
an
revised.
established neighborhood?
correct? Or however you'd want to, verb that, but I think that's
Because you're
important.
getting, I mean, this, either way, it's going to affect the cash flow or the money coming into the city. But in some areas, in the downtown area, a lot of that infrastructure is already put in place, whereas some other areas, you may actually have to be investing in the actual infrastructure and not get the money.
Can I throw in just another caveat to consider? As we evolve and move forward with the economic development process, and we do work seriously on these CRAs, community reinvestment areas, there is a trigger or a benefit within that is about 20% of that amount can be set aside for an affordable housing program or use of affordable housing program for the municipalities that use. The other city that I priorly worked for use a lot of those dollars to do a lot of different things. And that's by, I don't want to say by law, by structure, maybe Jeff can correct me, by structure of doing a CRA, there has to be an affordable housing component placed within that structure.
So can we link that language into our affordable housing plans?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Drew and I are working on that because we do an update here in January. So Drew and I are working on putting that information, that language in our current affordable housing plan.
Matt, one question I have is, what would be the benefit to follow the standard of must live or work in Washington County, Utah for 1 year before application date rather than restricting it to Washington City? What would be the benefit of either?
It was just a sentence that was pulled out of
I just
a
wanted to
prior
say-
program.
Okay.
So again, this is it's very fluid. You can determine the specifics of it. And that's more than anything else is kind of what we're seeking, is if there are red lines there that maybe you can spend some time and outline those red lines and then hand it back to staff, and then we can tighten up
'Cause I was just thinking
the
out loud
program.
in my head, I could see the benefit of having it Washington County because we have neighboring cities that have more of a surplus sometimes for rentals. And sometimes people just need a place to stay while they're arranging everything to get a house going and everything else. The more I think about it, I feel okay with it simply because people more than likely may be constructing a home in our community, but be in a peripheral city as they're doing it. So
I agree.
does that make?
Well,
I
and you
think
look
we
at,
could leave
Well,
Washington
and
County
sometimes
be
we
okay
don't
with
offer
that.
enough work in our
yeah.
city to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
When you
I
look at the
could see the
affected
benefit.
groups like school teachers or other institutions who are individuals we are trying to bring into the area.
Yeah.
They lend a lot of value even if they're teaching our kids across the line. So I would agree.
Yeah, that, as I talked it through, we had this at first, talked about it, but I feel better about that. I think it's a good thing.
Again, we'd appreciate, your input on specific, directions or qualifications we want to add to this. Again, the other piece of this, and I know you're well aware of this, is there is discussions in the state levels on requiring certain
Yes.
attainable, responsibilities.
So attainable housing is the new buzzword.
That's
not
that.
affordable.
I think that's what,
Can you tell me where that line starts? Because I would really like to know, when does attainable housing be officially attainable
I think they're
to?
using it because it's a more of a fungible term. Don't truly, because what they're really saying is that none of us can afford our houses. And so
Well, the average home here is 370, and that's, I mean, my kids can't afford it.
396.
Whoa.
It's 294 for a townhome now.
Oh my,
It's scary.
yeah.
Well, 396.
So taking back to the last conversation on expanding the qualifier, I guess, outside of Washington County. Usually Habitat for Humanity doesn't, in groups like that, they don't pick somebody up and move them.
No, I
You know,
think
they-
his
they wanna move
comment,
them out
his
of the
comment was
county.
Washington City or Washington County,
No, that was it. I was,
not outside the
at
county.
first I was wondering, should it be limited to Washington City, not Washington County? Because right now the verbiage is Washington County. But after talking it through, I can see.
Okay,
wisdom
well,
in-
the one that is being done up in Mill Creek, she was actually living in a basement in Hurricane. And they found that lot, and so Habitat will bounce
Washington County.
around.
Yeah, and I agree with
Washington
Washington County.
Okay.
After
All right.
talking it through. So yeah, I agree with you.
On the following fees may be waived, there's kind of an inference that maybe all of these fees would be waived, but maybe we could say one or more of the following fees may be waived, so that people understand that we're not automatically going to go down the whole list. And then at the bottom where you've talked about fees not imposed, even if we collect the fee, will not be considered for a waiver. I wonder if we want to say such as the Washington County Water Conservancy District.
We used to collect for that, but we don't anymore. So I don't know any other impact fees that the city collects for it. Well, the
We collect the
HCP,
Water.
the city collects for the HCP and
We
passes it
do.
on, but the Water Conservancy District impact fee, the builders have to go directly to the Water Conservancy and pay that. It doesn't come from
And
the
then they
city
bring a
anymore.
little receipt back saying that they've covered that.
Yeah, I think the HCP is the only one
It
that
is.
doesn't, right, Drew?
There could be more in the future,
Yeah,
but maybe give them an idea of what we're talking about. I don't know if that's necessarily, but I'm going to throw it there.
Even if it's just said any other waiver, any other thing not listed in the above is not up for consideration. I don't know how to say that, you know? Because we've listed what we're willing to waive right here. Anything else, we're really not up for waiving. Maybe that's just like fortified in language. Because there may be other fees, like you're saying, in the future, and if they update it, well, we didn't update this one, and they came back and it's waived. As long as we say these are what we're willing to waive, anything else not listed,
Well, we could just take that last paragraph off.
you just let it be.
Well, yeah, we have to
Because this
list.
is what we're doing. These are the ones we're up to. One or more of the following things may be waived, and just be done with it. I can agree with that.
Matt, question for you on the nonprofit status. We just had a couple of entities come into us and they were for-profit developers coming in, trying to utilize nonprofit, well, actually, maybe they're not nonprofit, maybe they're government programs. They wouldn't qualify at that point. They were trying to put in a couple of houses and utilize some government programs to put something together and keep the cost down, specifically for low-income individuals to get housing. They wouldn't qualify as the way this is written.
that's pretty much, up to, the council on how they want to treat that.
So what other entities besides,
Habitat for
well,
Humanity.
beside Habitat for Humanity are out there that would even come in for something like this?
There are some for-profit
Yeah.
that also has a nonprofit branch
Okay.
that could fly under that umbrella and request that way.
So you got Utah Housing Authority,
Mm-hmm,
which is one, but that's a nonprofit.
mm-hmm.
And
Correct.
Are they
there's-
actually building houses though?
there's funds that can come through Utah
Is there?
Housing Authority. There's actually discussions right now to do a Washington County Housing Authority, which is part of the HAC committee that I've been attending.
Okay.
Again, I brought up the community build that was done for that gentleman because I know there's some other builds that have been done similarly, and I think they're valid to review. So
I think I would like to see it opened up to include the community build and others. Just because we are kind of trying to experiment with it, I'd like to see what comes through.
I think-
The need,
That's valuable.
I think that'd be a-
Mhm.
I think for me, it's probably,
The
it's got to be something that rises kind of to that
Yes.
level of it, of, people are putting in sweat equity,
Yeah.
To help.
sweat labor, things like that to help build rather than, hey, I just don't meet the 80% and I want to break on my permit fees. That doesn't,
We want more than
that doesn't rise to the level for me.
Within that, can I ask a question, considering the case of where you brought up this person that was injured in the car wreck? What are the odds that this would be their first house if they're trying to apply for this?
It wasn't.
It wasn't, and so that's the thing is where I don't know if the first house matters as much as it is a resident. I don't want this to be so much, if there's the nonprofit entities that have the best interest in mind, which we really want to attract those. But I feel like it's the council's feeling and intent to find people within our community that have significant need, that we could use this to help an individual that is not it just gives us that freedom to consider.
The only tricky part on that, because that could give you the freedom to do that, it could create a pretty big request list. So I guess what we're
It's a
proposing is,
protection.
what we're proposing is something that's structured, that's strong enough that one has to qualify for, and not, because of, down their luck or different. I mean, I don't want to say anything like that, but what I'm saying is it's important to have a pretty, I don't want to say strict, but that's almost,
A refining process.
yeah.
I think it is, because I think we have to remember that based on the way we determine what our impact fees are, every dime that we defer
Set aside, yeah.
means
It affects.
that our citizens are gonna have to pick that up.
Mhm.
Okay, it's not free money, it's
Mhm.
not a pool of money sitting somewhere. It's impact fees that are based on costs. So every time we do that, other people in the community are gonna end up paying a little bit more to cover that. So, yeah, I think we need restrictions.
Well, I agree, considering what's been counseled, I like the idea of reducing it to 3 homes. I like the idea of staying within the nonprofit for the first phase and see what we can do with it. And then see if it's something we should add and expand upon.
Again, the only reason the nonprofit isn't because it's been created, it's been challenged. It's pretty straightforward. It's a common
Makes
thing.
sense.
So anything outside of that could give the opportunity to get challenged.
So the Habitat House that was done is the only time the city's ever done it.
Yeah.
I just don't think that even with 3, you're gonna have a flood of qualified.
Yeah, it's pretty narrow.
people, so.
And three isn't exactly gonna solve the housing problem.
So within the Habitat for Humanity, would that impact must be a first-time home buyer? Is that something that needs to be in there? Does that go into just our idea of our affordable housing plan as well, that it's a first-time option?
Correct, yeah. But then again, the first time, it could also be within the last 3 years, last 5 years. It can be, again, a number designated.
No, I'm just trying to talk it through to make sure we feel like, if it's what makes the most sense, then all good.
For now, I like first time.
What's the name of the program where they'll go and get like 5 or 6 homes or lots next to each other and then everybody goes and builds their.
The sweat equity group.
Yeah, they've had some projects over in like Laverque and Leeds that they just, I can't remember
That's
what
what they
that
do.
One of my
program is called.
sons was able to get in on that program, but yeah, they build everybody's home in that.
Mhm.
So we may, potentially have something like that come down the pipe, but certainly the council can make a decision
I
to
like the idea of
accept it or not.
Yeah,
Well, that's true. This is just one fixed program.
yeah, we don't
Mhm.
have exception language in here, but we could say, something, right, any request for exceptional exceptions.
Well, and that's why we thought that we could vet it through staff, through city manager before it gets to your, to this council.
That'd be true, so we don't have that
Yes.
flood if there's a flood.
Well, I
Yes.
do appreciate the concept that so far we've only had one that's been through the council with anything acceptable like this. So 3 is 3 times more than what we've done.
Correct.
So it gives us a broader spectrum than what we have allowed.
Either way you look at it, it's a positive step.
Yeah.
But even then,
Sure.
we haven't approved the one,
Not yet.
just was a deferral, right?
It was,
Oh, they
was
paid it.
reimbursed. They paid it. They want a
They were
reimbursement.
waiting
They're
for
seeking
us.
reimbursement is what they're looking for.
Well, I feel like it has enough for us to feel confident to give it a shot, knowing that it will be revised and considered as people use it. And if we need to go more, as the council feels good with the grid, if we need to go less.
I like
So,
that it's
so
a
just one thought, just on the number 6 versus 3. But part of what we want to do is be proactive with this so that we don't have legislators who live, like say in the Salt Lake Valley, take away our ability to make controls here and like using
Programs.
this as lever, using this as an example and say,
Mhm.
look, we're doing some creative things. I wonder if 3 is enough. Just wanted to have that conversation to say, like, do we
Will
want
the
to?
sign show a better investment on us is the kind of thing you're going at? It's
Just
the number
to
that
say
we're putting
we
aside.
have a level of commitment and we, you know, we've got, the threshold is pretty narrow. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not fixed either
Habitat for
way.
Humanity does what, one home maybe every other year?
So you think 3 is about what you're
Well,
gonna
it's
get?
3 times as much as
No,
we've
I agree.
done, so it should say up to 3. Right now it says 3. It should say up to 3 or whatever. But let's see what 3 does for us and then we can always expand it.
I appreciate the responsibility of starting up, being a little bit more visionary and going up to 3 from nothing.
Yeah.
That's a good start. And if we find that there's truly needed, and this is good for us, I would really entertain expanding it. But let's see what we can get with 3. I like the start.
Great.
So again, our request tonight is just, if you do have some time, a little bit later, got some time, put some time on the thought on this, if you wouldn't mind redlining some suggestions, and then just bring that forward to city manager, and then we'll take that information and tighten up the draft.
In my reading, the only thing I had initially is just possible zone of an area that was outlying. If we want to create some language that maybe narrows that, so we,
Within an
Boundaries.
established area or
well, I don't know that
something.
it needs to be in an established area. What I don't want it to be is some area that is completely undeveloped and we have to run streets and water
Would
and
that-
sewer.
Yeah, I don't think that would work in
Chances are
this
we'd
plan.
say no.
Would it have
Correct.
to- Would you have to?
It's simple. It's an easy decision there.
Well, for example, maybe one thing you're seeing, Councilman Ward, if you wanted to word it in there, I thought is, must be within a certain distance of existing utilities or something like that. to
Well, we
prevent
can, it is going to come before us. If we want to just review it at that time, that's fine too. But
That probably makes no sense.
Okay,
this is good. Thank you.
thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you.
man. Appreciate it. I see the chair.
What, really? You're being disposed?
That's it.
Man, fired.
Welcome back, Mayor.
Thank you. Number 2, number 3, what are you on?
Number 3, you're up.
Discussion of city festivals. Actually, that is, I'm going to turn the time over to Councilman Clough. He's the one that deserves all the kudos and the credits on that because we have had discussions about our festivals, but Dan introduced some ideas I thought we should present. So
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. Mayor and I have been chairing the city events committee for the past 2 years. And we've just really noticed with the growth of our community and with all people willing to serve, one area that seems that we need to take a next step in developing for the benefit of the continuity of what we want to do, and also out of respect for those who invest so much time and talent, is to get more of a structure behind how we select people and what this committee can do to better preserve some of our dearest traditions. And so the premise of this is we would like to, within our Washington Events Committee, put a little bit more structure. Any of the following appointments or events are intended to represent the image and interests of Washington City. The main purpose is to both celebrate and preserve our heritage as we go forward as Washington City. All budgets, permitting, and supervisioning of the events are to be approved, determined, and accepted by Mayor and City Council. We're a community that is recognized for community service and participation, and we seek to build capacity in our citizens in order to sustain our traditions and heritage as we celebrate our unique hometown way. So one thing that we're looking into, Mayor, along with council of our city manager, some things that we feel like we need to have brought within this community for appointment. Anyone who chairs an event or a committee that has the council, has basically the representation of Washington City, needs to be approved through the mayor and the committee. And so some areas we're looking into structuring better the appointments for our Washington City Youth Council, our Cotton Days, our Pioneer Days, our Veterans Days. And we have other community functions that happen on and off that the city's been asked to participate in. And the main idea is each year under the mayor and through those who have served previously to allow those who have served in the past to bring on someone who will serve the next year. We're looking at ways of passing off, not just blank slating everything, but allowing people to come in, learn the ropes, help and participate one year, and then serve as a chair the next year. So a lot of our structuring we're trying to do for this upcoming year is to work with the key participants of the past events, to work with appointed people for the next events. The service and term, the ideal way to do this would be a yearly commitment. So for example, one person would be over Cotton Days this year. And they could be considered for a repeat service or later on, but it is only a commitment up to that particular event for that year. But our hopes are, starting at the beginning of the new year, that we would be able to line out structurally who is in charge, who are our main people that are chairing events, and what's the desired of council for these particular events. And so we feel that it would just be a good thing to have that oversight that we need to have because it does represent the city and its interests, but also step away once we have these people set aside to let them run the volunteers and everything. And as there is a need to participate in the events or to help support a particular part of it, that would come back to the council or come back to the committee that's chaired by the mayor and a council member for approval of funds and everything else. So the funds also, once again, would be through the city. There would not be a separation of private and city when it comes to this. If there's donations and everything, that gets worked out towards accounted how it's handled. So that is a very broad stroke of some stuff that needs a lot of refining on how the funds will be handled. But we just feel it important to just put some more structure into it and not have any guesswork of what's happening in the next 3 months on particular events coming up. So that's where it's at. I just wanted to kind of open up there and discuss with the council. Is there anything in particular you had a question about or?
So help me understand. So currently those positions are being filled. They're just kind of until the person retires. Is that how some of those are functioning?
Well, pretty much. I mean, we've had people come up and say, I'm doing it this year, and they're telling us they're doing it. And we support them pretty much.
So this way you would have that as a regular agenda item in your committee.
Yes.
And then you would use your full committee to help select and then ratify each person, kind of take on the,
Sounds like it's not committee though, it's coming to the council.
Well, we haven't talked enough to feel very solid on who would be in it, but I'll give you an idea of what would be on this committee as a proposed idea. For example, we would have the mayor, a city council member, city manager, city parks and recreation director, an appointed person over miscellaneous functions, city treasurer, treasurer of events would be our person over finances. And then we've thought about including people like the Lions Club, someone from the Historical Society, youth council advisor. And if there's a particular event coming up, it's basically that chairperson of that event gets kind of the main stage to make sure they have what they need going into the event.
One of the things that sometimes can help, I mean, these are big events.
Yes.
So if they'll make it, is a 3-year commitment, a commitment where they're not chair, but they're learning.
Right.
A commitment where they are the chair, and then a commitment like they're helping the new one get through it. So
I could see
it's
that.
like a 3-year commitment, but not only 1 year, which they're in charge of the whole thing. Just a thought.
I think that's a great thing. The biggest concern in structuring anything around this is continuity, and also just a good, responsible way of both saying thank you for what's been done, providing structure for those who are doing it, and providing a transition to a next person who's willing to help. And I like the idea of the 3-year. I think that'd be a good thing, knowing that they're only in charge of the whole show for 1 year. I think that's a great idea.
I like where you're going with it.
so Yeah,
I appreciate the time and effort you've been putting into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really feel like the big thing is, this is something that is, when it's done, it has Washington City's name on it. And we're growing into a world where liability and financial needs are really growing into supporting these events. It just needs that structure in place to provide continuity. Some things we don't have to, and that's fine. And we want to stay out of those as much as possible, but we have some key rocks within our community that we want to make sure stay and sustain. And so we don't want to place a burden on people. I've felt there's been a lot of people wondering who's in charge or what's going on. And just to avoid the miscommunication and just to kind of streamline things into a level where people know where they can get information, and also we can account to people, say, oh, well, that's taken care of, and here's the chairperson. If you'd like to talk to them, great.
So currently what does your committee look like now? I guess I'm not even sure.
Well, right now it's been Mayor and I have showed up.
Right now, currently, Councilman, I believe it's who's ever the chair of the certain function, they have their own committee.
That's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
So just as a thought, because you've sparked a lot of thoughts from me on this, as a suggestion, would it maybe be appropriate to have somebody from our Parks Committee, maybe not Parks or Recreation Department, actually be the secretary of that, keeping calendar items and making sure that certain tasks get accomplished, and just kind of have our professional staff assigned to do the calendaring and those events that come up that maybe our lay people might not. Because there's a lot of, like you say, that just really lends some professional continuity to the changing over of some of those positions.
I think that's a great idea. If we can have someone, I mean, we really want to build it into something that's taken care of. So more of a secretarial role on those.
Well, certainly they could do a lot more than that, but if they would retain,
Liaison.
There's got to be a liaison to staff.
yeah, keeping the calendar, making sure the email groups get put together and sent out, and making sure certain items that are, you just don't want to miss one of those big events or not have a body in place, or but yeah, liaison staff too, and they could really fulfill that for us.
Right.
That's why what I'm hearing is that we're not going to just assign these big projects to staff, that there's going to be a community committee coming, but I think that staff needs to have some obligation with the committee.
Right, they would have training as far as like, oh, that's maybe not wise for us to do that, or that's not gonna work with our insurance or other things, We just kind of have that resource there.
I agree.
Great. No, that's
So
very good.
kind of where we're at, what I'd like to kind of propose out there is, Mayor and I like to take the advice from tonight and try to put something more for the council to improve. And it's something that we can act upon for the upcoming season of events after Veterans Day. We would like to really make sure things are in place going into this next season. Councilwoman Granger, I really appreciate your concept of what we'd ask for people out of the 3-year cycle. I think that was great advice. Councilman Moore, I like the concept of getting a good liaison in place to make sure we have the right people in place to support our volunteer groups that are going to chair these, and have something more for you to look at in the packet and discuss. That would be okay.
Can I just ask a question, Kimberly? Aren't you pretty active in monitoring the finances of those events?
Only if they get a purchase order beforehand, so to some extent, no.
Okay.
They don't come in and they don't bring in what they're necessarily planning to do. We set up a budget stuff, but not part of the committee anymore. So usually it's just basically the expenses just start flowing in.
Okay, we look forward to getting your opinion on a few things, Kimberly. Thank you very much.
Matt?
Can I add a caveat to that? And
Please.
just in consideration as we are structuring things a little bit better. I think as we expand our reach and support of our local businesses, more so Washington City-based businesses, maybe as we do events, if we can first reach out to them first before we stretch out to other communities that maybe have a similar type of, I don't know, amenities or value. I think if we can reach out to our local businesses and give them the opportunity first to be a part of our events, whether by sponsorship, whether by booths, whether by being involved in it, and then if they can't provide that service that we're looking for, then we can maybe go out and see who can provide that service.
Well, and I think
it's
it's-
That'd be
having
great.
somebody from the chamber, our chamber, I know we've combined chambers, so maybe we can't separate that out anymore, but it does
Well,
seem like.
Just another caveat, one of our goals that we just had a retreat on, one of economic development's goal is to create or recreate the Washington City Chamber of Commerce.
So a representative from that on this committee would be
I
very
think it'd be invaluable. Any way that we can
Again,
enhance it.
just
Just
food
in
for
case.
thought, food for thought. Thank you.
very much. Appreciate it. Okay, I really feel, Mayor, as we propose this forward, obviously, if we see someone that would be a valued part of bringing into this committee to really ensure that the proper things are celebrated, supported, and represented, I'm fine with expanding it. But I feel like if we can start with something that the council feels comfortable with, the overall frustration I hope we avoid in this next season is I feel like a lot of times our most amazing events come with this doomsday feel. And I really feel our last events, like the 24th, just turned out so beautiful. And maybe we're lucky, and I know a lot of people work so hard and spend countless hours on this. I just want to take away the miscommunication of our perception of our priority.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, I feel like our priority is to sustain these things. They are our community. And so I just don't want that to be ever questioned as we move forward. I want our council to fully feel in our position and hopefully in the public's eyes that this is a huge priority to us and that it deserves our attention and structure.
I agree. Yeah, the 24th came off very well.
Oh.
Just too bad it had that whole sort of Damocles starting to it.
It did. Wow. So I would, I guess with the council, my commitment is hopefully we'll come back next month, maybe sooner, but just it needs to be looked through and take all these ideas and pass it through to look at and add a little bit more to and give us a starting ground for next season.
Yeah, we're seeking your help also, and anybody's, all of your
I
help.
appreciate the
That,
feedback.
absolutely. So, and kudos, Councilman Clark, because he's really taken the bull by the horns. So thank you for that. Absolutely. Any other comments or questions on that? Okay, then we'll move on. Discussion and review of a proposed amendment to the 2020 fiscal year budget. Kimberly?
No.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just earlier today, and when I say earlier, probably a few hours earlier, this information was distributed, should be available and uploaded into your packets that we're going to go over this evening. So we've got the proposed budget that we have for the 2019-2020 budget would be to have a public hearing on the 23rd with the resolution to follow. The last budget amendment that we did was held back on August 28th. Since that time, the city has been awarded several grants to help with staffing resources that we were quite excited to receive. And along with that and a couple other items we identified, it became prudent to do another budget opening at this time in conjunction. Historically, we usually don't have another one until around February, March of the year. But anytime that we have a need for these things to come before the council, we like to bring them for you so that we can continue to move forward with business as needed for the city. So this budget amendment would increase the city's total budget by $848,261.
And that's just including the grant.
So this includes the general fund, which is $453,261 of that, and then $395,000 within the power department. Okay, so those are the two funds that are being impacted with this budget opening, is the general fund and the power fund. So on the general fund side of things, the police department was awarded the Victims of Crime, which is a VOCA grant that we receive, and it was to fund a full-time victims advocate. The increase in wage and benefits and training supplies associated with this grant is $66,916. This is in this award, it was actually a 2-year grant that we received the award on. So the first year, which impacts this fiscal year, was the amount I gave you, the $66,916. That the second year will include $81,923. That'll be to continue to fund the full-time position as well as to bring on an additional part-time position. So the victims advocate over in the police department, I don't know how familiar you guys are with that. If you have questions or want to know a little bit more about this specifically, I'd like to invite Chief Williams up to kind of go over that if you have any questions about what that service provides to us. Otherwise, we can move on to the next item. So you just let me know.
I would prefer to sit down with Chief Williams in private and get a little bit more information from him on that. That's
Great.
okay.
Okay, so the second award that we received,
I do have a question. It shows that total increase in wages and benefits, $456,000. The grants total.
that's on the safer one. So that's for the fire department. So the one we just barely covered was only for the victims advocate position in the police department.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
So the funding that you received on that is just through 2 years, though.
It's good for 2 years. And so during those circumstances, when they are grant-funded positions through the HR department, those positions are notified that they're a grant-funded position. If the grant funding is no longer, they basically apply each year, but if the grant funding is not received, that position actually terminates until, if it came back to the council to award funding as a full-time position within our regular funding sources.
So of all these that we're looking at, do any of them require that we continue it even without funding in subsequent years?
No,
Okay.
Although we may fall in love with the position and decide we can't do without it even at
Tends to
the,
happen.
but that would be the chief coming before the council. to
that would be
make
part of
changes.
we would pick that up in our budget when we talk about adding new staffing levels. Would
But
be the
that doesn't
time that would
necessarily
come
have to be
forward.
caught by HR. That's actually written into the governance of the
So
of the
we
position.
put that on the personnel file. And it's notified with the employee that's hired and fulfills that position. So obviously our objective is to continue to fund it. It's just something that we would address as the needs arose.
I appreciate the opportunity of bringing in the services and the foresight of applying for these grants to see how they impact our community and see if it's something we want to invest in and continue forward. I've heard good things. I don't know enough about exactly how it'll impact by having this victim crime grant, but anything that can make our community safer, I think is a great thing. You know, after hearing council have questions, I apologize. Chief, if you could just kind of come up and give us a little bit of talk on that, I'd appreciate it. I'm sure there's many more conversations to come. I was probably a little too premature in saying, no, I'm okay. I spoke for the council. I should have spoke for myself.
Good evening, council. So our victims advocate, they help with our domestic violence calls primarily. They also are a resource for the victim through the court process for filing protective orders, stalking injunctions, and that sort of thing to kind of provide a level of protection during an investigation or if they're in a long-term
So can you
abuse.
re-say that though, for filing injunctive orders? What,
A stalking injunction,
stalking, thank you.
yeah.
How many of those do you estimate we get a year?
Our victim advocate's actually up in the courtroom right now.
Oh, really?
I can, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. I would say probably less than 100. But,
So you do have a victims advocate now?
right.
So
So-
this would be an additional person?
No, so what happened is we had a part-time position because of the grant funding, they approved the full-time, so she moved into a full-time position. So the following year
So you would,
increase by one part-time. So it'd be a full-time and a part-time the second year of the grant.
Right.
And then we would keep reapplying for
so
that.
this year, we're really only increasing that by one part-time position because you already have a part-time position. So you're going to go from part-time to.
No, we just moved her from part-time to full-time. So we still have the one advocate.
Yeah.
We have volunteers, and
Oh,
then
okay.
we'll have a paid part-time.
And this would,
Following
this
year.
would reduce your reliance on your volunteers?
What's that?
This would reduce your reliance on your your current volunteers?
What it does is it builds continuity in the process. In times past, we would have victim advocates, but they don't stay long because they find full-time employment elsewhere. So then we retrain for a new victim advocate. And then, so in order to retain and provide a higher level of service, it's beneficial to have a full-time employee.
Stalking orders and domestic violence primarily.
Domestic violence, and then protective orders, stalking injunctions, different things like that. Now, it does go past that. If they're victim of assault, then they can help as well in those cases as well for reimbursement for medical costs through crime victims, reparations and stuff. So
And this individual would be well educated on different crime and advocacy groups and resources that are
Yep.
available to each of these individuals.
Yep.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
thank you.
So the other grant that we received this year that had been applied for was the SAFER grant, which is a federally funded grant that allows with assisting the hiring of full-time firefighters. Washington City was awarded grant funds to fund 6 additional full-time firefighters. The wage and benefit total for bringing on 6 full-time firefighters would be an impact of $456,000. This grant is a 3-year grant, of which the first 2 years we would receive $292,500, and the second year would be $136,500 to help fund those services. And then after the 4th year, then those costs would be picked up fully by the city.
Okay, so
Try really hard to have really cool acronyms. That's a pretty cool acronym.
They do. They do.
all right, so our increase in wages and benefits is 456,000 each year.
Yeah, so 6 full-time firefighters for us for a full year at this point would run us $456,000.
Okay, so the grant only provides
It's
292,500.
So when we originally applied for the grant, basically it's designed to be a 70-30 for the first 2 years and then to drop down from there. The cost of hiring and bringing on a full-time firefighter now, that cost is up from when, so these grants are submitted in the, I'm not sure how long ago it was, probably at least a year ago, I believe that grant was submitted for and applied. And so the cost to bring on the firefighters now it's bringing it down to more of about a 65% coverage versus the 70% that we would have had. Now, any pay increases that happen over the course of those years as well, the city would be absorbing the costs associated with that. Their contribution would be these flat amounts on a yearly basis for those
Okay,
years.
so the point I want to make is that we're being asked at this point in our budget process to hire 6 additional full-time firefighters, of which maybe 4 of them are paid out of this grant. So we're actually adding staff of at least 2. Would that be close to correct?
That would be close to correct. In this year's budget, we initially looked at a proposal to look at hiring 3 full-time firefighters. Knowing that we had applied for the SAFER grant, we opted to not include those and bring those forward this year because the SAFER grant requires you to increase staffing levels. So if we would have went ahead and approved it and did 3, the SAFER grant, we would have had to bring on an additional 6. So we wanted to wait to see what contributions we might be able to receive if we were awarded the SAFER grant results. And then if not, then our plan was to come back to the council after the first of the year once we'd seen how the funding had come in for the city. Part of that is what made up that year-end fund. If you remember, our original budget that we had for the city had just under $300,000 of money that we were basically appropriating to fund balance. It wasn't tied to any specific thing. Those were reserves that we were trying to hold out to wait and see if we were going to need to put a request to hire some firefighters this year.
So according to this grant, we have to have a minimum of 6 firefighters. We can't start lower than that, or we
You
apply for
cannot.
6?
You'd either have to reject part of the grant to not receive it. So we received a SAFER grant a number of years ago that allowed us to bring on some staff as well. If you want, I think Yes, Chief Evans is here, and he would be happy to come and address any questions you have regarding
So
that.
this is the third year for the
So
SAFER grant?
this would be the first year. It's a 3-year funding source.
Oh, but we've had it in the past.
Yes, so it was probably, I don't know, how many years ago, Chief? Like,
They got it before I came, so it was 6 or 7 years ago.
mhm.
So it seems like 6 is a large increase in 1 year. Is some of that related
Your
to the new
staff and-
fire
Mhm.
station? Why are we making
Right.
such a jump in 1 year?
So I'd like to invite Chief Evans to come up, and he will be able to go over and talk to you about the coverage that these new positions would be able to allow for the city.
You know, speaking of coverage, I really like your shirt, Councilman Ward. It's a beautiful
I'm
shirt. you
feeling
have.
a deep kinship with the fire
That
department
is a
today.
beautiful shirt you have.
It's in the car.
Mine's in my closet.
Yeah. Actually, both yours are in the car. So it does give us some opportunity. As we've talked in the past, we have some significant challenges filling our part-time and volunteer slots, even though they're funded. Right now, we do pretty good to fill one of the 2 slots. So our part-time hours augment the day side, volunteers at night. So we're still closing 62. It's probably only about 10% of the time. It is open most of the time. We moved to open 64, the new station in Coral Canyon, August 1st. We probably opened it maybe 10% of the time. Filling that second spot, we have a tough time. And we just finished another recruit academy. We started with 15, and at this point in time, we got 1 that's finished. And everybody in the state tells us that we're doing really, really good because they're having a hard time
So you're saying
even getting any.
The recruit academy, you had 15 participants. I guess I'm not even familiar with what that is.
So when we run an initial training, we provide all their training for them. So we'll run a fire training program to start at first, and the state requires Fire 1, Fire 2, and then hazmat. So it takes about 3 months, a couple nights a week, and so we've started with as many in the last 2 or 3 times. We've started with as many as 32 people that will sign up and come and get started, and then over the course of the program, it just thins out almost weekly. And we'll usually end the class with, 10 or 15 people. And then they take their state certification exam. And if they struggle with it at all, you can never get them to come back. It's an interesting dynamic that we've found, like I said, actually throughout the state. And so we'll usually, at 15, I think we'll probably end up with 3 or 4 that'll finish. And 3 or 4 will, especially out of 15, will probably be about the highest percentage we've had in 3 or 4 years.
And Councilwoman Granger's comment or question, did you hear that? Is this for volunteer or is this for?
Yeah, so usually if they're starting out, we would start them in a volunteer slot as far as the nighttime things. And some people, that's all they want anyway. They work Monday through Friday, an 8 to 5 job. And so they're just looking to help out at night. We still do CFU that are looking to get into it full time. Our full time positions are the same as pretty much everybody. They require your fire certs as well as an EMS cert, so at least an EMT.
Please, what does CFU stand for?
What is what?
CFU, what does it stand for? CFU? You
CFU.
said CFU in your sentence, I thought. Like the letter C, the letter F, the letter U. Did I misunderstand that?
I didn't pronounce something very well. I can't think of anything.
CNU, is that what it was?
You said we still do CFU law.
Maybe CA.
Oh, yeah, we see a few.
There's
Yeah,
so
see
many-
a few.
I'm
Sorry.
just the one that's asking the question. I know I'm not the only one that has the question, but I'm the one dumb
Kimberly.
enough to say it. So it felt like another acronym. So,
We do have a lot of them for whatever reason. And
oh my goodness.
the federal government gives us even more about.
That works. You know where I'm at.
So the 6 we would open, so 62 and 61 would be fully staffed. And then that would realistically give us the staffing to open 64. Realistically, we're probably going to still be about 95% because we'll still have somebody off. So the thing to remember is they do come in 3s.
So 3 people, because we only have 3 shifts, because they work a 48, so 24. So 3 shifts of people, so 3 people equals 1 person 24/7. So you're really filling 2 spots basically with 6 people as far as the staffing goes.
Thanks, Chief.
Thanks.
Did that help you, Councilwoman?
Yep.
And Councilman?
Okay. So the other item that we have highlighted is next would be the community center. So after basically a thorough review, it's been determined that it would be in the best interest of the city for the concessions to be pulled back in-house and no longer lease those services out. So this budget opening represents an increase to the budget of $70,845. It is anticipated that revenue will be generated from concession sales that will be sufficient to cover the cost of concessions and lost rental income associated with that.
The golf course is included in that, isn't it?
So the golf course is doing something a little bit different with their concessions. And after meeting with and talking with both Barry and Kevin, they did not anticipate that they would need any budget changes associated with theirs the way it was. So at this
what are
time,
they
there's
doing
not any
differently
changes.
then?
I believe that they're looking at having it work like a rental, but it'll fall back under the pro as it had in the past, so that Kevin Soderquist will manage the concessions for the station. So I think you'll still fall under the same type of scenario where you'll have rental income that'll come in as associated with that.
So is that in
So-
addition to his salary then? Is that additional salary?
It's not, and I don't know how they're working. I don't know. It won't be coming through wages. It's basically another contracted service, but it will be the contractor lease on that will be through the golf pro or the golf manager, course manager, I should say.
So then again, does he make additional wages through this?
He would,
Contract.
I'm assuming, would make additional income as part of running the sales, the same as the private company had. But if you want information on that, I didn't gather it as it wasn't included as part of the budget opening or some additional funding. But I'd be happy to have Barry kind of draft up a little memo on that we can send out on
think
how that
Would
process
be
will work.
useful to know because we've hired him full-time already. And so now we're going to add to his full-time in this manner. I think we need the information.
Okay, I'll make a note for him.
And I see we have representation from the community center here.
Yes.
Can we have maybe somebody speak to the issues that led up to this decision?
Thanks for giving me a couple minutes. We have leased out the concessions for 2 different companies over the period of about 6.5 years. Probably the biggest area that is concerning to us is customer service and being able to provide for our citizens and control the customer service experience when they come into the facility, as well as have greater control over the pricing of products. Whereas with a private company, we allowed them to determine pricing and offerings as they saw fit.
So you feel like you could get the pricing down? What are you looking at as far as a pricing adjustment?
Well, we would have to look at what the price of product is right now. We've kind of done a cursory look of things, and we would likely run prices similar to what we did when we previously ran the concessions. So
Would that be up to Kevin, for example, if he's contracting that, who controls the pricing? Does he control it or do you?
at the golf course, Kevin would handle that. I'm only speaking specifically of community center.
'Cause they're going to pull this in-house.
Yeah.
At this point and not do away with your rental and.
Correct. So essentially what we're saying is that the revenue would be neutral for what is happening now. So when you look at the increase cost in the budget opening, it's not actually going to change what the overall community center budget, profit
So
loss.
just maybe, I would like to make sure I understand this properly. The intent is to construct the pricing in a way that it provides a lower cost service for those who are there price, but it would cover itself within the demands of the community center. Like the revenue from there would cover the person, for example, running it or.
Correct.
Okay.
So do we keep tabs on this separately, Kimberly? That is, here's the revenue from the concessions, here's the 70,000 we're allowing.
Separate line item.
Mhm.
I'd
Okay,
appreciate
so we
that.
compare the income, it doesn't just go into the big income
That's correct.
dollar. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
But if you're revenue neutral, but you're actually looking for an increase here.
Well,
is
what
that
we're
to
saying is-
offset the rental?
Correct.
This is an initiatory.
So we will make revenue over expenses in concessions that would match what we currently make in the rental of the concessions.
Okay, I'm trying to think of the verbiage of that. You're basically just trying to cover the product and the wages.
And what we make currently from the concessions
Oh, so
lease.
you're going to recoup that as well.
That is correct.
But in your budget, in this budget, you're asking for an increase here. Is that just to cover the interim until you can?
That's to cover the expenses associated with buying the product. We still have to
initial-
increase our expense budget to cover
To
that.
allow you to have funds available
Correct.
to
And
allow
then
that.
get that.
And we will also increase our revenue that would match that. So it's not just the expenses that's increasing, it's the revenue increasing as well.
And have you said you've done some cursory looking at the pricing of that? Because I mean, you're setting a pretty high bar to go hire people who will do better service, drop the prices of the concessions, but also recoup all the money back. You're not looking for a profit, I understand, so there's
Yes.
some margin there, but.
I have run the concessions prior to us leasing it out, so I feel like I have a pretty good sense of what the pricing could be
That
and what
was
the
6.5
staffing would
years
be.
ago though, right?
Yes.
So when you say it will be neutral as per not just the cost and expenses, but as to by changing this over to the rec center, will the value of what we had of having someone else run it, that will be recouped along with coming neutral with the expense of operating the business.
That is correct. As well as giving us the opportunity to provide
Make some money.
an experience to, control the customer service side of things.
And do you feel like your staffing and, well, I guess managerial oversight will increase?
We've already let the staff know what that would look like. And given that I've run it before,
Yeah.
I know kind of what that administration side will look like. And so we have the structure in place to be able to handle that currently.
So who would be over that from your department?
That would run under the aquatics department as it has previously.
I have no more questions. Any other council? Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Well,
Ben.
sorry, I was just kind of pondering here. So the primary goal is to alleviate those two concerns. Have we addressed that with the vendor who's in there currently to ask them to step up a little bit and increase customer service and be mindful of their pricing?
Yes, we have.
And
And
their response was no performance increase, I guess.
correct. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions then on that for the community center, the other major item that we have identified is in the community development department. We're increasing the professional and technical budget by $75,000. $50,000 of this is to cover the cost of third-party plan reviews. So third-party plan reviews have to do with some of these large commercial developments and then these large apartments that come in. There's certain projects that we send those out to be reviewed instead of the plans being reviewed in-house. That is passed on a cost per cost basis back to the developer. So the $50,000 that we estimate that will be spent between now and again at the end of the year, we have corresponding revenue. If we don't spend that much money, then it just simply won't get spent. We're basically anticipating this is how much additional we will have in plan check reviews. And then we added the revenue. So it's just a straight pass through basically for those third-party reviews.
Do you show that as a separate account?
The professional and technical is the account that the third-party reviews go in. The revenue goes in under plan review fees. Our plan review revenue is basically where it comes back into. The same as if we had done it in-house, per se. The additional $25,000 that has been placed there is for a design guideline and vision plan for the Washington Fields area. I believe that Roger has kind of discussed some of this with you guys regarding that. We've worked with Drew to find I don't know what you'd call a planner that's going to be reviewing and looking at this for us. If you have questions about that specific process, Drew's here to be able to maybe address any of that.
I'm gonna need some refresher on what that was. I'm not recalling. But that's the 25,000.
That's the 25, yeah. So Drew, can you maybe come and I printed this one out.
I think Roger may have asked all of you just kind of individually. At your last city council meeting, you had a consultant here for a particular project below Bella Vista, and there was a planner who's been hired by them to do their plan, and asked you how you felt about that young man or gentleman, and because that's the company EPG that we're going to be hiring to do our design guidelines in the fields. And so with that, they'll do some public meetings, some gathering of information from the folks that live down there, put together some open houses, and come together with a design kind of guidelines and rough layout of the fields area, how we want that to go with residential, commercial, multifamily, et cetera, as we kind of head down that way.
Into our general plan, then is that?
It really, I mean, it really won't. I mean, it's more, will fall under in the zoning guidelines, and we'll adopt that in. It's just like right now we have our downtown mixed use zone that we've only had one property owner take advantage of, the Dove Center, which used to be the Aaron Kimball Foundation building there. But we created that years ago, never took off. But we have this really beautiful book with design guidelines. If you're going to build in the downtown area in that zone, if you get zoned that way, here's the criteria that you follow. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing down in the fields, is just creating a kind of a manual, so to speak, for that area and guidelines to follow. So, and that's what the 25,000
Would
goes
this be
for.
all of the fields? So are we redoing this?
We're actually doing everything south of the river down to Stookie Farm, actually to the airport, and basically from the east boundary line to the west boundary line. We're going to kind of touch each one of those. We'll probably be more specific on the main roads. Washington Fields Road, 3650 South, 3090, some of those more bigger roads that have already been master planned to be our main transportation. They'll probably be hit a little bit heavier. 2000 South, and which is Sandia, and the Fields Road. We'll probably talk about that corner a little bit maybe in this as well.
As far as potential
commercial opportunities and
and
just overall planning. Yeah.
You're considering the open house. I know there are some key property owners that live down in the fields. Is there going to be an address to kind of maybe bring them into discussion?
Oh, absolutely. We've already talked about that with our consultant. We're going to gather, say, like a Burke Staley or 3 or 4 folks like that, love to be in the middle of that, are trusted and looked to by the folks down there. We'll probably find a half dozen of them.
One one of my biggest concerns is making sure that if we can identify property owners and bring them into discussion and into the concepts of what we want to do, I feel like that would be the most respectful and reasonable place to start within it. So I'm hoping that's a priority as we move forward to bringing public input for starting with the property owners.
I want to give you another example. I want to bring the Hancocks and Gibbies with their piece, because that's one of our big pieces that's left. It has frontage on the Fields Road. It has other between the school. That was another one of them I thought we'd bring on, one of the family members from that group on would be a great source, I think. Again, bring on a Burke Staley, and there's probably a handful that we'll just go through. Those are just ones I was thinking off the top of my head.
We really have a good heritage of some people who have really invested their lives and their family name into the Fields.
Yep.
That being said, I hope that as we do this, they just can play such a pivotal role to our future concepts of the city. They've already been a huge role in what we've become.
Yep.
And that just is a priority to me, I feel, as a councilman.
Larry Adams comes to mind. Maybe his son.
Sweetest people you want to talk to personally, right?
Maybe his son, but just
So
some
help me
folks.
understand how this would roll out, not having done this. So you would set the design guide, you'd have this company help work up the design guidelines. There'd be some open houses, people would have some discussion about it. Once those are set out there, do we then look at general plan zone changes, or do we wait?
You'll
until-
adopt the guidelines and they'll become part of that area. So you'll probably, we'll probably go in and amend our zoning ordinance to say that, these particular areas are, we even may create a small chapter that talks about that. And then it'll say with the associated adopted guidelines. We probably won't bring the guidelines in 100%, but we will reference the most current, whatever we end up calling those design guidelines. Say we could end up be the Washington Field guidelines. But we'll reference those in the zoning ordinance somewhere, and people will still have to incorporate them into their planning of bringing you subdivisions, zone changes, anything else that takes place in the fields.
Not
It'll be,
necessarily the general plan itself.
no.
And whatever-
It'll try to fall in line with the general plan, the designations. That'll still come into play a little bit, but it'll mostly be when people come to actually do the development associated with the zoning that they're a part of. So the zoning will have to follow a general plan, but then when they get their zoning, doing the design of that, they'll have to follow the design guidelines. Does that help you make sense? So it really won't be in the general plan other than the designation for the zoning. Then in those areas, they'll follow the design guidelines.
How are we split up for that within the city right now, where you're the community development director, but we have an economic development director? Would that span those two department heads? Would you be just looking for input there, or does it pretty much just come through your department?
Well, all those things will come through my department. Matt kind of steps in and works with the particular developers per se and helps them through, say, a bunch of pre-submittal process, so to speak. Getting things in line, finding out what their needs are, seeing what the city can do to bring good projects in that then we can take through the zoning process. And so that's
And then
kind of what his,
Before we put a contract in place, you say EPG?
yes.
Is the company there? Do we have some guidelines to them as far as what our goals are, what we're trying to get them to accomplish?
Yeah, we've already met with them and told them what we want. They've come and they've done this before. That's what's nice about hiring these companies. They already have scope of work of
So
what
half
they've
it's
done.
already free?
What's, well, believe me, I was the guy talking about money, through the whole thing. And I think we're getting, that's why the 25 is in there. We have a price from them for 23 and some change to do. And we feel like we're going to get a really good product for that.
Do we have those guidelines or the goals that we've passed on to EPG? Do we have that in a format we could get to the council?
We probably could. Y'all have to, I can pass you on that scope of work or what they're going to do.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Any other questions? And you understand the other
Well, I was just
money,
gonna
right?
I was just going to looking back at that. So maybe walk me through that again.
Well, what's happening right now is we have a lot of these big projects coming in.
Right. So I understand.
Mr.
I
Bellison,
understand
not
we're
Councilman
having
Bellison, has a project
Yeah.
he brings. And so it because of the intenseness of all that's in it, not to hold up our review of the day-to-day other
Right.
things. We found it better and probably more efficient to send it to a third-party review. Now, again, all the companies have agreed, they understand that it's needed and it's best for them to have that reviewed. It's basically the plan check. So we send it off, whatever that fee is by that third party. We have 3 different companies that we let look at each one, and they'll say, you know, they're either available to do it or here's the price on this one. And then we send it off, they review it. So what happens is that the city ends up paying that bill to them, but we just send on that same invoice to that developer on that project. He pays that. So it's a,
So I get that part. What I'm trying to understand is the difference between the 75 and the 50,000. So you're getting your budget-
25 goes to that design guidelines
Okay.
and 50's in the budget just to
Okay.
bounce back and forth as we pay out, they
To have
pay
the
in.
increase and then you get that. Big
Yeah, so we're not spending 50, you know, I mean, if we do spend it, it's being recouped within weeks
Yeah.
of each one of those
Yeah,
bills.
so as we look at the bottom line, Kimberly, I'm assuming that we're saying that we're increasing the budget by whatever, 800,000, but the reality is coming into that budget
There's
is
revenue.
significant
900,
revenue,
yeah.
so it's really not an overall increase. It's a temporary setting up of the
Right.
budget, but the income's on the other side for a lot of those.
Yeah, so my increase is going to be 25,000, but it's to pay for the design guidelines. But the 50 is not really an increase. It's going to just be a wash.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Drew.
So you are correct about that, and that is one of the challenges. So I do try to identify that when we have revenue sources coming in that will help attribute that. But the state code only requires the council to appropriate, basically to authorize the expense of funds, which is why you don't necessarily see all of that. But we identify, it's in all the budget detail if you were to flip through and we show all the individual changes. And then I do try to identify it specifically in the executive summary if there's going to be revenue coming in to help offset those costs. And then as a result of these proposed changes within the general fund, it would decrease the amount of funds that were originally anticipated to be appropriated to fund balance by about $221,000. This would still leave an additional $66,000 in current year revenue that's available for current year expenses. Now, again, we are at our maximum balance as is, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that as I do the fourth quarter review and stuff with you guys. But with these budget opening that is anticipated, it's still leaving that an additional $66,000 of current year revenue that is not appropriated to anything at this time. The last item that we have is.
Okay, so sorry.
Uh-huh.
So what is the reduction?
So what it means is, I talked a little bit about this before. So when we do the budget and we say we want to spend this much for police and this much for fire, and here's how much revenue we have coming in, we're required to have a balanced budget. And so if we have additional revenue that's above and beyond what the expenses we plan to use, there's a line item called appropriated to fund balance. So we had, So before this change, there was $287,270 of basically unallocated revenue that had come in from the general fund. Part of that is what I had talked about that we had set aside from the original budget that we did, anticipating that we would have we would bring back to the council a request to hire additional firefighters after the first of the year if we did not receive the SAFER grant. Okay, so with opening the budget and doing all this money, it's going to drop from the 287,000 down to 66,000. So there's still an additional 66,000 of revenue that we anticipate that will come in this fiscal year that is available for additional needs within the city if the council
Okay.
chooses.
But my clarification was on the 221,000.
Yes, so it's being
That's
reduced.
just more, it's just,
So
we guessed
yeah.
underneath what we thought we would bring in revenue. And
Right.
that's the increase there. So, and
Yeah.
the difference is, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay. And then the last item that we have is for the electric fund. So the electric fund, we're anticipating an increase of $395,000. This increase is related to capital project items. So the Saley substation, which I believe Rick had presented to you a memo that kind of addressed some of the needs with the Staley substation and the groundwork that needed to be done there. This was going to be an increased cost to that project of roughly $435,000. There was a capital project item for $40,000 for the Graham Manor that is deemed no longer needed, and that is being reduced and taken out of the budget. So the net impact would be a budget increase of $395,000. Rick, you want to?
Project up by the Grand Manor Road, and with other improvements we've done in the area, we really don't need to do that now.
Our Warm Springs area.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we agreed as a council a couple of years ago to pass through additional costs for purchasing power without necessarily going through a series of hearings and things. Okay, but it was only for increase in costs of power, right? So my question is, does this change increase costs to our customers in order to pay for that? Because we've not, I mean, if we approve this, then are the electric bills going to go up higher again? And how much have they gone up with increased costs to buy electricity? Because that was something we did agree to, but I don't think we've heard a report on it since we agreed to it.
Well, I think, as I recall, part of that was the anticipated maintenance costs.
No, I think it was just increased
There is
cost
a
of power.
component called the power cost adjustment that
Yeah.
does follow our wholesale. And these funds really don't have anything to do with that. And Kimberly can address some of the balances better. But basically, we're using more out of the reserve funds that we've previously
Okay.
already
All right, and the other
accumulated.
is, I guess I'm making a request for how we've been increasing based on power increases, and if so, what are those? Because I would like to know.
It varies month to month. It's done on a monthly calculation, and it's generally been between 0.2 cents to 0.3 cents per kilowatt hour. And again, that's done based on our bills we get from UAMPS, and it's done with that. It's called power cost adjustment.
Yeah, and that,
Power cost adjustment. These funds that you're asking, this increase that you're asking for here, what effect will that have on ratepayers?
There's no anticipated direct change because of this.
Was that your question?
yes.
Yeah.
I
Maybe I
can
did
answer.
made it more complicated than it needed
No,
to be.
I got it. Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
I guess one thing that I'd be curious to see is the overall rate increase that was proposed. A 5-year rate increase, I believe. We're now going into year 2 or 3 into that. Curious to see how that's, impacted our utility. And I know, I'm pretty sure it won't come up in this, but there'll be a lot I would like to know in the conversation going forward. How is that? Is it really meeting the demands that we have in the department? Is it too much, too little? Where are we on that?
Your timing for the question is great. We actually, week before last, had a kickoff meeting with UFS, who did the previous study, and we're doing a continuation basically of that study, and part of that will evaluate, did it do what we wanted it to, and what do we need to do in the future?
That is something that's a priority in my mind, just to see what happened from that decision, and is it really doing what we needed to do? So
This is a time of year when we get a lot of power questions because we're at,
We got a couple of those last night, so.
yeah, we get a lot of them.
Where
So
was
the
that at?
more we're prepared to answer those clearly, the better off it is for us.
And one of the things that's not directly related to this, but the utilities department is working, and we're working to shift the bills when they're due to be closer correlated to when the usage, because basically the bills this month was really
Come
for
later.
August.
Yeah.
And so there's a disconnect there. And over the next 3 months, we'll be making adjustments to where you'll be paying August in September instead of October.
I
And
think
so that's gonna help a lot.
useful. I'll give an example of that is I've just been on trips for almost 4 weeks of the last 4.5 weeks. I've been away from my home, okay, not using very much power, but my bill doubled. I recognize that I do recognize that that's that delay,
Yeah.
but not everyone who talks to me
Yeah.
recognizes that.
Right,
And
and
I
so
think it adds
they've
to-
worked
yeah.
really hard. And it's not just power, water has to a certain degree the same thing going
Yeah.
on there too. So,
Okay.
I think
Very
that's great.
helpful.
so
I think it adds to the hatred when it's so far apart. Further in the distance.
yeah, we'll get it
So how are
down to
you doing-
about
How are
a,
you making that adjustment? You're just changing the dates from the collection time?
for 3 months, we'll go basically from a 30-day read to a 35-day read. So it shifts it out. And so so it'll extend those read periods. And we're doing that in the shoulder months to where we won't be in the higher tier as much, or most people won't be in there at all.
In other words, when it's cold enough that we're not
Right.
using a lot of electricity and then they'll
Right.
get us.
And so by
that makes a
doing
lot-
that,
Yeah.
it shifts, we'll keep the billing date the same, but it shifts the reads closer. I can send you the email, or Carrie
I get it.
worked it out, and it'll be a very good thing.
Well, I will have people ask about it. So yeah, if you would send the email, I'd appreciate that.
We can show, he did a little spreadsheet that showed when
Does it have little pictures with arrows on it?
no,
If not this, then
Okay,
Thank you, that'd be helpful.
thank you.
Okay, council, that includes the major items that we had identified here. So in your packets that you just received tonight, there is the written executive summary that you'll be able to continue to review. That's what we kind of went over tonight. And then a summary that only includes the accounts that actually have changes so that you're not having to sift through all the pages, okay? And then for the actual resolution and the opening and stuff, it will have the full budget for the city, and that's also available for you to be able to review. And it's just that there's no change in all those, but it does equate to about 55 pages of documents. So feel free to look this over as you think about it. If you have additional questions regarding any of the items that are covered, please don't hesitate to reach out. It will be out now for public notice for the hearing that will be scheduled for the 23rd. On that night, I will be actually out of town, but Brian Brown, our finance supervisor, will be here and available to address any questions that might come up that night.
So
Yes,
in
I wanna
the
s-
summary, do I see the increase to the revenue, the projected revenue from each of the items that we're thinking are going to come back to us in revenue? Is that just,
So in the written summary, I identify what they are.
okay,
In the actual chart summary, it's like barely another page. It, by line item, will say, so federal grants that are public safety, so police and fire, we have $332,000 of additional revenue that's coming in. Plan check fees, 50,000. You'll see that correlate to the 50,000 that I identified for community development. That aquatics revenue reduction of $7,500 is the rental revenue that we talked about decreasing because of the concessions being taken over. And then you have the increased revenue for concession sales that you can see there. And then it basically will go through the expense side for the other departments. So there's only 4 revenue items that are associated with the budget opening, and those are identified by line item for you.
Just as usual, Kimberly, thank you for those executive summaries. They're
You're welcome.
extremely helpful. And I generally continue to find that I can't ask you a question that can't be answered.
Thank you.
thank you.
Oh, sorry. Item 5 with the discussion review of anything else, Kimberly, you guys? Okay, sorry about my inattentiveness. Wow, it was a big word. Discussion review of proposed resolution to establish the allocation of RAP tax funds.
So I was not in attendance at the workshop meeting last when you guys went over and reviewed this, but I had done some forecasting projections and wrote up a couple of scenarios. So Roger had indicated the scenario that the council seemed most interested in, and then I drafted the resolution based off of that. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to look at the resolution, if you have any questions regarding that, if those are indeed the percentages that you were anticipating. Basically, what the RAP tax in its nature is a restricted revenue, and it can still only be used for what RAP tax are designed for. What this resolution does is allows us to take that restricted revenue and then commit it towards specific types of items that qualify for that RAP tax funding. And so we would just identify that, and instead of tracking one lump sum total, we would provide you with the totals for those three categories that would be available. It is within the council's discretion at any time to modify the resolution and choose to shift any of that committed fund to any other purpose within the RAP tax guidelines.
So it's really intent but not law.
That's right.
That means we can put it as needed still, even though we have instruction.
It's just intent. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, starting with the direction.
I appreciate the fact that we're going to start putting some potentially for a facility down the road. I mean, I've kind of been on that a little bit for several years now, and I appreciate that. It's kind of the direction that things are going. So.
I do look forward to seeing us work towards the end of additional cultural arts and that the arts in general, whether that be looking at ways that we can do statues or make sure we have art when we build new facilities, or whatever type of direction or partnership the council chooses to go. I am interested to know if the council at this time would, now that we kind of have some designation and this first step that looks like we'll be going that way, if there's any interest in basically generating like maybe a 90-day, a limited use committee related to the cultural arts and stuff that would have a council representative and some members of the community to try to determine what we would like that to look like in our community.
High interest. I think it would be irresponsible of us to allocate funds without having a plan and involvement of the community and a direction and steps and strategic and some people to raise money.
Within that, one particular area to bring in the community, I expressed a similar interest as Councilman Granger. I think a good resource to bring into this would be our youth council because of their vision and perspective. I think there could be some good things to be brought in with that as well. I really would like to see that brought into that committee if it's approved through the council. I think they'd be a good resource.
I would also kind of like to put it before the council that we maybe have that change the application process.
Okay.
So that the application process goes to that committee prior to coming to us, so that there is a little bit of conversation about some of the city's goals and what we're looking for, and having some prior to it even coming to the council here.
So you would be looking at a standing committee versus I was looking for, the initial one that I was looking for was a planning committee to kind of come up with some vision. And again, this involves people who are interested in arts, but it also involves regular people of the community who maybe had never thought they were interested in arts, but just we would try to advertise it in the newsletter and say we're looking for, people who are interested to serve for a limited amount of time, who are creative or innovative, or, you kind of word it so you're trying to pick up a lot of different things, and then come and put a committee together, try to come up with a plan. And then if you guys felt like you wanted to look at something as a standing committee, I'd maybe want to look at that as a secondary step.
That would be great to start with what you have been going forward. I feel that since this is something that we are going to have at least for another, what are we now, 6 years to go on this RAP tax?
No, less than that.
Yeah.
But
But the goal would be that we can renew it by showing what we've done, and that our community will support that and what we can give to them.
I feel as
through
long
that.
as we have that resource to our community, I think it would be great to have a community. I'm moving towards that secondary step. Obviously start with the primary one. Let's get the 90-day, but I am leaning towards, as long as we have it, it would be a great recommending body to us as the council to look at those things and hit them first.
Yeah. A building without a plan's got to come first.
Okay. Well, thank you. So that resolution is on your agenda for tomorrow night for consideration for approval.
Thank you. I wonder if we want to add some language to it that indicates that there needs to be this planning group and looking at the RAP. Maybe not, because really we're just resolving an intent for the money, but
Mhm.
what that other piece needs to be.
So
part
if
of
we
it.
do decide to run a standing committee, it will probably take additional, formal action because you'll be creating like a commission or a body that would be doing that. And, but what we would do is we can recruit and bring names in for you, at least for this initial go around. Then we would submit that to the mayor for recommendation, at least for you guys to review. I don't know if it has to be formal on this first level of planning committee or not. I'm not quite sure how that will work, but we'd like to start soliciting some names for
I'll
you.
get the
So,
intent to do it with the holidays.
okay.
That kind of committee, that I think our intent ought to be every bit as strong with this a third of the RAP tax.
Yeah.
And, put us maybe ahead of the thinking, or at least bring in we have people out there incredibly capable in
Absolutely.
the arts. We heard one the other night, and also very capable at raising money. And I kind of look at how Tuacahn evolved, and I'll tell you that it evolved with a plan and people who wanted to spend a lot more money than they could ever get, but it really just started with people coming together and thinking about it.
I feel like we're setting ourselves up to where we really be more accountable with our funds if we had a committee in place. I think it will really fortify our intention and direction as well. So I appreciate your thoughts, Councilman Granger.
I think having a formal plan would also allow us to utilize the Washington City Foundation to seek out additional grants and funding that's available through nonprofits. So because we have that foundation set up, it opens up another resource to us to be able to do that, but we kind of need to get a plan and a vision first. So thank you for your support with all that. And I'm
Any
not
other
going to sit
questions
down.
on that? Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you. Item 6, financial update, fourth quarter for fiscal year and first quarter fiscal year 2020.
Thank you, Mayor. And tonight, I'm actually going to end up only covering the fourth quarter. We're not quite done. We're just a week into reconciling the first quarter, and I was hopeful that I might have enough information to go over that. But I think I'd just be jumping the gun just a little bit if we tried to tackle that one tonight. So I'm going to do is we did put in your packets tonight after the meeting had started. You have your budget status report that will give you through June of this year. And then I just had Tara upload kind of my executive summary on that, and we're just going to talk about a couple of items. I apologize that tonight I'm not able to use my OpenGov platform. It's working just fine, but I have new data that needs to be uploaded. And with some updates in software, my magic that gets everything ready, I wasn't able
Do we
to.
have, Mayor, urgency time-wise with this, or would it be better to let her get her whole presentation together and put it
So
off
the
for
fourth
2 weeks?
quarter, I'm prepared to be able to cover for you. You just don't have the visual aids. There's only a few items. You'll get it in more extent. This is going to be the preliminary, and then obviously you'll have the audited financial statements that will come before you in December. If you would be willing to entertain, I can wrap this one up in 15 minutes.
Should call.
The clock is running.
Okay. So,
Let me put that timer on.
So at the end of the fiscal year, basically, the fourth quarter, we ended with total city revenues at $60,806,806, and our expenditures at $51,925,464. Basically, the primary thing to identify here in this fiscal year budget is that growth continues to be a major component for Washington City. So as we go through and again, I'll only hit a couple highlights that we'll touch on, probably mostly the general fund and a couple of other items, but you will see consistently revenues in excess of the budget for the year. If you wanted to go through, you're welcome to, but it's the driving force of growth. So impact fee revenues above what we anticipated. We did come in strong, and we had some of these large commercial projects come in this year, as well as apartment housing. So we're kind of seeing a little bit of a shift in the development that we have. We're slowing down a bit on the single family, but we're busting at the seams with a lot of these apartment complexes. With building revenue that comes in, the revenue actually comes in prior to a lot of the cost. So that's one thing I want to make sure that you recognize and are aware of that. These fees come in when the buildings are basically being constructed. We're not really servicing residents yet, and that will come and follow. So as the growth continues, so will be the need to make sure that we can provide adequate services and that we're maintaining those service levels that our community has come to expect. In the general fund, I will be coming back to you. We have some things that we need to talk about in regards to an allocation of additional one-time funds. So we did end the year in the general fund with revenue in excess of expenses by just shy of $2 million for the fiscal year. We had an 8% increase in revenue over the prior year, and our expenses came in under budget by about 8% for that. So these one-time funds are items that will come and bring for you to be able to prioritize and to look at either reducing debt, the funding needs that we have in our capital project accounts for upcoming projects. They'd be things that we'd look about for property acquisition needs and things like that. But they will be things that we need to look at and consider and address before the end of this fiscal year. I'd like to be able to be working on that through a workshop session so that we have it prepared prior to our next budget opening so that we can appropriate those at that time. So
Thank you for adding reducing debt.
it is always one that's in there. Debt in government does have a purpose. It allows current residents who are paying in their money to utilize, and receive the services that they're paying for, and then to stretch that cost out over the future users as well. So there is a purpose behind that, but there is also a time to look at some of that debt, and when we have funds available, to look at the priorities and the projects that we have. And as the council, you guys get to decide what you think is the best use for that. So we will obviously come forward with some recommendations, but ultimately, if you're anything that the council decides and deems as the most time-sensitive item would be where we would apply those things. We are at our state limit. We will take a note in our year-end financial statements for this, for being in violation of our excess fund balance that we have. Because it did come in stronger than anticipated with year-end. We do have the Main Street project that's coming on. There'll be some landscape design issues and things like that, and some funding needs associated with that, but we will be able to bring that forward to you. The only other items I wanted to touch base quickly on, and then you can review the rest, and if you have any questions, let me know. The irrigation fund. So the irrigation fund continues to operate with a loss. Despite our planning, we did come in still with a negative cash balance at the end of the year and required an additional transfer from the general fund. So the general fund total contributions to irrigation were about $60,000 this year. The irrigation fund is established as an enterprise fund, and an enterprise fund is designed to account for operations and costs for providing goods and services to the public and to be financed primarily through its user fees. So,
Real quick, can we go-
uh-huh.
So the excess that's, we gotta do something with, can that clear off the loan from like the sewer?
The golf course loan, the sewer loan,
Yeah.
yep, you could utilize it to pay that down as well, yes, or pay it off. Yep,
So
that would be one of the
what loans do we have
considerations.
floating out there from entity? Enterprise
The
to
internal entity one, the only one regarding, we have the one that's from the general fund to the sewer fund from when we defeased the outstanding cash flows with the golf course when it was pulled back to the general fund. We have that one. It is roughly around 800,000, I think, is maybe where that balance is.
Because those funds can acquire this additional money that we owe them
Yeah.
without that being an issue.
Right. And then
Right.
the other loans that we've done is we have 3 internal loans related to our fleet replacement model that we do an annual loan on. So we have those. We do have capital outlay equipment that was approved in this budget for the golf course and the Parks Department. And the recommendation for that was either a external 5-year lease purchase or an internal loan. Our treasurer is recommending that we finance it internally, but again, we could look at just paying for those outright without doing an internal funding would be another consideration. So there's lots of things that we can bring up and look at that. With the irrigation department in general, the one thing I just want to touch base again is that this is a fund that continually has not been able to be self-sustaining. So the recommendation, again, coming from the finance department, is that either the user fees be increased to cover the operating costs of this fund, or we need to look at discontinuing this fund as an enterprise. There's two methods you could do that. You could roll it in as a division under the water fund. Then basically what's happening is that your ratepayers are for culinary water would be subsidizing the cost of the irrigation. You can roll it into the general fund, and the general fund would pick it up. Basically what we're doing now, we're just doing operating transfers over to it, but it's supposed to be functioning as an enterprise fund, meaning that it functions as a business, and we know that that's not happening.
One thing before I feel comfortable as the councilman moving forward on that is it would have to go into some very intense scrutiny of how the costs are being distributed to that fund relative to persons over it and funds and services that were qualifying employees of being in that and causing it to go negative. Is it truly negative because of how it's operating, or are we setting it up to be a negative fund? And that's something that I'd like to understand better as a council.
We pay for a part-time, so basically half of one employee is what's used in the irrigation fund.
And from my experiences as an irrigation owner, that'd be 1/2 more than I've experienced.
What you don't get to see is that when they're having to do the maintenance and the ditch repair, it takes a
Right.
crew. So you've got a whole crew that's out there whenever they're doing those types of things. And again, you're right, you don't see somebody out there necessarily every day that's doing something, but in terms of the cost to maintain and operate that at a minimum, we feel is at that rate. So it would be adequate and appropriate then, if you chose to pull it in as a division within the water fund. That's where the employee sits that's covering those services.
Well, to avoid a lengthy discussion with a whole lot of unknowns, just if we were
Yes,
willing to
that's
talk about it,
nothing
we'll
for
talk
decisions
about
for
it.
tonight. It was just simply something to
Well,
be
I thought
aware
I
of.
was I thought it was a full person as well that was allocated.
It's only a half, isn't it, Mike? Yeah.
Well, within that, just know that I feel it's worth discussing how it's operating and functioning. One thing within that is just the overall quality of what we intend to have people pay for is in question as well.
Mhm.
And just to avoid me opening up cans of worms that we can't even address
Right.
anyway, that I think it's worth discussing in a workshop to talk about that.
Um,
I'm fully.
So one of the other challenges is that we have all this dry system, okay? So we have all these dry lines that are out there in the irrigation fund, and that because this functions as an enterprise fund, we have to start, we're bringing in depreciation expenses that on service lines that we don't have any revenue that comes in at all for.
I'm also
So
fully
again,
aware
there
that no one knows
there's a
this better than
large, there's a lot to discuss on that.
Right.
But I think at a minimum, we need to look at probably consolidating that fund somewhere else.
Okay,
So-
so I'd be
But
open
is
to
that because is it because we've dropped users? Or
No.
we've never because
The-
we have done both, right? We've never really increased that to match anything, but we've also progressively lost users who've just moved or haven't.
But the city pays that, and it's not part of the operating transfer we make. So any of the shares that are not rented out, then the general fund makes that bill also. And then whatever the operating shortfall is in the irrigation fund, we do an additional transfer over. So we're paying for 100% of the shares that are actually available. There's not any that we're not actually billing out, but the
So you're
city is
saying it's
still the
completely
majority.
just we haven't adjusted the revenue.
And so, yeah, you're right. So I've been at the city for 22 years, and these were the rates for the irrigation users when I started. And they had been established quite some time prior to that.
Well, I look
So-
forward to discussing and talking about the utility and how it's funded.
Let's do it.
I know it needs to be looked at, so I know it also can't be addressed tonight. So I'll
Yes.
try not to make it any worse.
Thank
Can we
you.
just, I want to make a probably unappreciated comment back up on the electrical fund.
Yes.
Revenue collections at 106%, expenses at 95%. By my calculations, that means we could reduce our electrical costs 11%.
Only if you were looking at only operating revenue that came in from the use. So the excess revenue, a bulk of it is going to be impact fee revenue. okay, that can't go towards paying your operating bills and stuff like that. So we're looking at the fund as a whole
Great.
for
Okay,
that,
I got
but.
it. I got it.
Okay, and then just as a refresher too, we do have our risk management plan for the power department that was adopted by the council about 10 years ago. And that plan established specific reserves that we're trying to build up for, and those reserves are still underfunded. So we do look forward to the date of when there might be able to be something, but we're not quite there yet.
Okay.
And that's for
Okay,
risk
but we have
management.
in the past reduced fees where appropriate as a council. So
Good
it's
answer.
not something that
You got
Washington
my
City
intent.
doesn't ever do.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
So that's for
Kimberly.
risk management with inside the power fund?
yes. Yes, we have a, it's called, I think that's what it's called. The risk management plan. It was adopted by the council back in 2008. And as part of that plan, it established some reserve policies. There's 3 specific funds that we have, repair and replacement, capital rate stabilization fund, and then the capital resource fund, which is for,
Or like on the road
resources.
safety, we have a-
and they all have caps on them. And it helps establish what we should have as a reserve balance to help with that, so that you don't have to do rate increases when there's things that happen.
So it's
So
primarily rate stabilization. What was the other?
we have a
one?
rate stabilization fund, we have a capital resource fund, and then a repair and replacement fund. And so maybe we'll put it on for the workshop, another workshop session, and kind of go over that as a refresher. We can let you know where we're at on those balances. I just did that update with the power board at their meeting this month. And we kind of went through and covered those items, but it might be of value to you as a council. So
So none of that would protect us from a solar flare.
no, we're
I was
toast.
talking-
Or cool.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay.
Well, it was a.
It's the
it was-
sunspots we're
I had
protected
I
against.
was talking to him at the open house yesterday about that. We had a fun conversation. So two of us like enjoyed.
So the storm drain fund is the one fund that the expenses came up over budget, and this was an error on my part with the year-end budget opening. We had a capital equipment line item that we purchased equipment out of. The original budget was $107,000. We spent that money. At year-end, that line item inadvertently got changed to 0, so there was no budget. As a result of that, the total fund is short $55,000 on there. So that's why that one is reporting over. And then in the fleet fund, Fund 61, it is the other fund that at this time still needs some extra help from the general fund in regards to contributions. We did have a general fund contribution of about $88,000 to that fund. The fleet department is just an internal service fund. All the work it does is for the city's services itself. The finance department, we continue to work closely with fleet manager and the public works director to establish best practices within the fleet fund. And
Which is to reconcile that down to 0.
yeah, that's the goal and objective. So
Kimberly, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to the management of our fleet fund and how we've set that up at our public works, had an opportunity to go and tour everything. It doesn't really show properly in the financial numbers right here exactly how invaluable that is to us. To just how our system works, we would be spending a whole lot more in many ways if we did not take initiatives in this. So I just like to say my sincere appreciation to our public works for running that. It's really well done.
thank you.
Well, I was going to express my disappointment in myself and the council for not being better prepared to ask you more difficult questions to
Okay.
match the level of preparation you brought.
To brighten your load, there's 2 things that typically everybody wants to know about, and that is the golf course and the community center. So I just want you to know that the golf course, in terms of its revenue, did better than it's done since our pre-recession numbers. And that was with a 2-month closure with their project that they had. You know, the work that Kevin has done up there and the outreach that he has done and the grounds and everything, that golf course is in the best shape it's probably been in a long time, and it
As long as
shows
I've
by the
been mayor,
players.
That thing is,
So,
it's in the best shape. I'm getting calls from folks in Butte, Montana saying, what are you doing down there?
So the
Okay.
golf course, back to that. It never did go into black.
we did have 1 or 2 years that we functioned in the black pre-recession. Okay. And that was it. Right now, we finished the year with a ratio of 70, so 75% of their expenses are being covered by their operating revenue come in. Our target is 80% is where we'd like to get with that. On the community center, again, they had another historic year. Their revenue was up 6.5% over the prior year, and very indicative of, if you've been up there lately, that's a busy place. So their first quarter too is just a little hint is come in quite strong as well already. So their target ratio for us is set at 65% of their operating costs. They finished out the year at 74%. Now what that tells us is that, again, by the pace in which they're growing, that we do anticipate that they will have some additional increases to their expenditure budget in the upcoming year to help offset some of that coming in. But again, our target is 65%. We'll continue to watch that and bring it up as we continue to go. But it's a happening place, and thank you for coming out to Washington City night last night. It was fun. We had a lot of people come to the booths, and we shared a lot of great information. And from what we're hearing, it was, one of the best turnouts that we have had and participation. So thank you.
Busy.
Thank
That's
you.
fun. So did I get that right? The golf course is currently at 70%?
Yes, they finished off the fiscal year with a 75%
You still have
coverage.
them
Our target
targeted?
is 80. Mhm. Our target is 80, and Kevin thinks we can get there. So we're not afraid to set the bar high and
With them being
see what
down
we
for
can
2 months,
stretch.
I
So,
would assume they'd have been over that.
so, yeah. And so again, that was with the closure. So that was a 7% increase from their last year.
That's terrific.
Thank you.
We get that new Marriott in there doing golf packages.
Yeah, for sure. Brio.
And Brio's doing their golf
Get their
packages.
cars over there.
I drag you out, Kimberly, of 17 minutes.
And you and I take it at tea time.
All right, we'll move on to item 7, review and request to serve on the planning commission. As I reviewed those applications, I don't know if any of you took the opportunity to do so. My recommendation tomorrow will be to ask Brian Musso if he will serve on the planning commission.
I think that's he'll bring a lot of insight and value to the planning commission.
Any of you know Brian?
Is it in tomorrow's agenda?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the letters are in the packet for the workshop tonight. There they are.
Let's see.
Yeah, go back. They're right here.
Yeah, and I'll recommend that he become an alternate, and we'll move Monty into full-time status.
Okay.
Any questions or comments on that from the council? If not, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Be ready for a lot of fun tomorrow night.
Aye.
Bullseye. Wait for a vote from you. Say something. Say aye.
It doesn't have to be a roll call vote. It just has to be a simple majority.
Aye.
It doesn't,
You know you will.
Craig, can I see you a minute?